Okay, it is 6:01, and we will be calling to order the October 17th meeting of the Planning Commission. If everyone will please rise, join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening, everybody. We'll go ahead and jump right in here, and we'll go ahead and start with roll call.
Member Wolf.
Here.
Member Keeney.
Here.
Chair Pro Tem Saragosa.
Here.
Member Friend.
Yes.
Member List.
Here.
Okay, we have quorum. We're going to go ahead and move on to the consent calendar. The one thing I'm going to ask on the agenda is we are going to move the election of officers up to item 5, if everyone is in agreement on that.
Yeah. So moved if it requires a motion.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Just as a clarification, was that to adopt the complete agenda and minutes? Or was that just on moving the item?
I'll move to adopt the revised agenda.
Second.
In favor? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. Okay. Item 2. Any items pulled from the consent calendar? No.
Move approval of the minutes.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, let's skip 2, go to 3. Items of interest to the public that are not on the agenda. So this is any items that are not on the agenda if the public would like to make any comments. Seeing none, we'll move on to communications. Any communications to the Planning Commission?
None from staff.
All right, moving right along. We will now then move to item 6.2, which is the election of the 2017-28 Planning Commission officers. I know we've had to move this around a few times, so we're going to go ahead and nominate those officers.
I'd like to make a nomination if I could, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I nominate Michael Saragosa as chair.
Second the nomination. Move the nominations be closed.
Oh, we have to have a vote? Or is it just one position at a time?
Yeah.
One at a time.
Looks like the recommendation were separate nominations are requested. I'm
All
not
right.
sure if my second half of my motion was legal, but
You have to do it
you know where it's
7-5 by
going,
saying
sir.
aye.
We have a second. You want to go ahead and do all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, and now we're going to do election of the vice chair. Do we have a motion?
I would move Commissioner List as vice chair.
I second the motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Can't escape.
Congratulations, member.
Can't escape.
Okay. We are now going to then go ahead and move back to item 6, which would be,
Wouldn't it be 5 point?
5.1.
Well, we
Public
moved
hearings.
item 6.2 ahead, which that makes it item 5, does it not?
Yes.
As a
It
reordering
does.
of the agenda, so to keep it consistent. And
So item 6 would now be, we will now then move to item 6, which is public hearings. And that is item 6.1, zoning ordinance, text amendments, modification to section 10-4-3, yards. And this is for Chapter 4 General Regulations of Title 10. And we've been discussing this for the last couple of months, and I know we've all been wanting to be present to discuss this item. So with that, I will hand it over to Director Rivas for his staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Commission. I'm going to be brief. We've had this item on our agenda for quite some time. First, staff would like to recommend that the Commission bifurcate the discussion into two parts. And I think we've mentioned that before, but I just want to reiterate. I think it may be simpler if you go ahead and decide to discuss first the fence height, the fence itself first or second, and then depending upon which one you decide, we'll then do the other, and that would be to discuss actually what uses should be permitted within that 20-foot width, which would constitute the front yard. And so discuss those two items. The only other thing I really need to bring up that is new before you is the Exhibit A, which is the draft modifications to Section 10-3 or 10-4-3 yards. We modified that again. It was brought to my attention that under Roman numeral 1, C1, staff had inadvertently struck out too much of that section rather than just add in side and rear as shown. So we've retained, for the most part, that Section C1. So now everything's consistent and all the yards are accounted for. So with that, I'll turn it over to the Commission and to have hopefully a good discussion on these items, whichever the two you wish to take up first. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, just a suggestion. I concur with the staff recommendation to bifurcate the issues. I might take that one step further and request that we separate the recreational vehicle discussion out further. Just my personal opinion is it seems to almost be a category of itself, but I certainly serve at the pleasure of the rest of the board.
I would agree.
I'm fine with that. Okay. Any questions to staff at this moment? All right. I'm going to go ahead and open up the public comment portion. If anyone in the audience would like to comment, please come forward and state your name.
Which portion of this are we discussing right now?
Whichever you want.
Well, you're splitting it up into pieces, right? So they're going to become sub-items?
We're going to take comment on all of it up front.
Okay, and that doesn't seem quite just if you're going to break out conversations into separate items, and I'm meant to speak to all of them all at once.
I would simply observe, though, Michael.
I mean,
no,
obviously.
I would simply observe, right? I would simply observe that we wouldn't have a give and take anyway. So you would come to the podium, you'd give us all of your comments on whatever the agenda item is, and we can take all those notes, and I'm sure that
Okay.
we can. I don't think that.
Yeah, I pretty much have all my items here.
If staff could assist, Mr. Chairman, I would just add that the entirety of the item is before you, and so when members of the public address the Commission, it is to whatever portion or the entirety of this ordinance change that is before you. Staff's recommendation to have you separate out some of the individual pieces just makes it easier for deliberation, for staff interaction, just as a course of discussion. So you wouldn't have one commissioner maybe just talking on the fence heights and all of a sudden another commissioner switches to use of the front yard and another one switches to something else. So it was just to sort of make it a little easier for your deliberations, but there's
Correct.
Nothing, we don't need to go back and forth with the public unless the
Right.
Commission desired to do
No,
so.
we're just going to do it as one comment.
And Mr. Chairman, I'm sure we're not going to be cutting any of the speakers short this evening. So.
No, I don't think so.
All right, start? Okay.
Yes.
Good evening, Commissioners. I've spoken to this before. I do not like it. I think it's an attack on freedom and personal property rights, and the banning of private property vehicles, RVs, boats, trailers from property and forcing them into off-site storage. And I just submitted a complaint to the claim of CEQA exemption that this possibly would have no impact whatsoever on the environment. But if you do ban all those vehicles and they do go to outside storage lots, no analysis has been done of all the extra travel to those storage facilities to visit their equipment and the resulting air quality, traffic, nothing. So I disagree with the blanket claim of exemption. Otherwise, land of the free, right? Not if this passes as is. I also find my fellow citizens' sheer apathy on this matter appalling, being that we're discussing the potential taking of private property rights. Wasn't a couple months ago, this room was packed to the gills with people fighting for the rights of alien illegals. And only me is here to speak to the rights of American citizens. It's really sad. I would like you to clean this up to make it a little less appalling to me. If you could define a driveway, a width of the frontage, a third, 20 feet, 16, 12 feet, whatever, and then every vehicle shall be parked on their driveway. Nothing on, most of us don't have lawns anymore, so you can't say lawn. All vehicles, let's start out with something small, and if we have to revisit this in a year and make it a little tougher, fine. But I also don't like having to change the rules for everyone because of a few bad apples. I have the list of complaints here, and multiple ones are on the same site. So I don't know if it's just neighbor feuds that is that list. So why should we change the rules for everybody just for a few problem sites in the city?
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'm a little bit unclear as to what you just said. So you have a copy of the list of complaints submitted?
I made a public records request for the list of complaints because the staff report just refers to citizen complaints and support by the council. But the city manager today told me that there was no notice of intention by the city council on this item. This is staff driven.
So, okay.
Yeah, this is the list of complaints.
So, okay, so there's a list of complaints, and what I heard you say, and is that the 80-20 rule, 80% of the complaints are coming from 20%, basically, a private principle application?
Yeah, there's a large portion that seem to be.
All right, I just want to make sure I understood
few
what your
sites.
comment was. Thank you. Okay.
Anyway, so I'd prefer if you defined a driveway, the size of it, and then state all vehicles shall be parked upon that driveway. If they can't fit them, then they have to park them somewhere else. That's fine. But to outright ban everything from the front yard just because people don't like to see it, we don't control colors in this city. I could paint my house any ungodly color whatsoever. I don't do it. And there was also, if somebody is appalled at the sight of an RV in somebody's front yard, then why would you go with a 30-inch fence? Why not allow a taller fence to block the view of it? It just makes no sense to me. Also, I have a significant investment in landscape in my yard, and a 30-inch fence does nothing to keep the deer from destroying my yard. A 6-foot fence does nothing. I've seen deer straight up stand still, jump over a 6-foot fence. So anyway, we're not going to have 10-foot front fences, but something needs to be considered about that. And a 6-foot, 50% open fence is just going to be so much chain link. It's going to be the easiest solution for people. So if you do go that route, don't allow chain link on the front, please. That's pretty much it. I'd like to keep us as free as possible for as long as possible in a socialist utopian state, but I don't think it's an uphill fight. So anyway, do you want me to submit the list of complaints? It's a little too late, but.
No, please do.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Seeing none, we will go ahead and close the public comment portion and bring it back to the commission for discussion.
a question for staff, and it really is a question. It's not leading anywhere. I'm just curious, if we didn't pass this, and the handful of parcels in the city that are obviously eyesores, people obviously taking advantage of their neighbors and their neighborhood with whether it's RVs or boats or washing machine parts or whatever in their front yards. Is there some other is there any other mechanism available to go after those troublesome parcels in terms of compliance other than, you know, worrying about fencing and what can be in what yard and such? I'm just wondering if there's another hammer to hit this with.
There is the nuisance section of our city code, and staff has on different occasions gone after properties that have excessive refuse and debris and scrap on their property. And typically it's because it's visible from a street. If it's not visible, then there's probably not a complaint to be filed about it. But if it's refuse or garbage, well, then we have a health issue as opposed to more of an aesthetic issue. But staff does, from time to time, go after properties that are, let's just say, very poor housekeeping taking place on those properties under the nuisance ordinance.
All right, thank you.
But that's not for, I guess, a claim of blight. That's more for health and safety. Blight just being accumulation of cars that aren't running, falling in. Is that part of the definition of debris, or is it more garbage, that can be abated?
It's more of a nuisance being, something where it could have a blighting influence. Normally, blight is something where if properties, it's sort of a domino effect. If you have one property owner that's not taking very good care of their property, well, then maybe another property won't take care of their property, and then so on. And you have a blighting effect. Typically, that's what that means, is that you have a creep of certain kinds of land uses or deferred maintenance, all that kind of thing. It can run the whole gamut. A house doesn't get painted, or a window gets broken and doesn't get fixed, or the weeds the grass isn't mowed, those kinds of things. And over time, if it continues to grow and exacerbate, then you have what's called a blighting effect, then you have a drop in property values and that sort of thing. But usually that happens over a longer period of time. So here we're looking more or less at an individual parcels.
I'm simply going to offer, just as a beginning, just a philosophical discussion. In my personal opinion, that any action to control the use of private property requires the utmost of caution, and has to be grounded in true, solid benefits. And I have said multiple times that this whole proposal troubles me greatly, and it looks like a citywide imposition of CC&Rs and HOAs. And I'm going to start there. I think there are some objective criteria that we could probably come up with. For example, I am surprised, for example, that the city is okay in the proposal with the storage of vehicles, because I would think that that's not something that you would want. Yet, if somebody has a fishing boat, that is suddenly an offense. And so that type of what I consider arbitrary evaluation is troublesome. I would take the commissioners, my fellow commissioners, to Exhibit C. And I would ask you to look at image 3. I would, and ask, what is the problem with this? What is necessarily the problem with image 4 or image 5? Image 2, this looks like a fairly large parcel. Image 1, you might say, yeah, that looks kind of willy-nilly, helter-skelter on the lawn. Okay, so if the driveway were expanded and that was all gravel and or paved where those vehicles are now, would that then be a problem? If those vehicles had cobwebs sticking down from the bumpers and the tires to the ground, that would be one thing. Or if they're covered with leaves and they clearly look abandoned, that's one thing. But if the vehicles are there and they look like they're being used, and they were on a paved surface or a graveled surface, then we're getting into really, really dangerous territory because somebody doesn't like how something else looks. I'm really troubled by that. Now, I think a safety and sight distance considerations, certainly we can come up again with objective criteria about that. But as the speaker pointed out, we don't require color palettes. What if I want to paint my house rainbow? Or God forbid, what if I want to paint my house as an American flag? Holy cow, I can't imagine what that would create. I'm not required by law to have a yard. And a lot of people don't have yards anymore. Okay? I take pride in my landscape, what I'm doing, and the deer notwithstanding. But I'm not required to do that. I could, in fact, have just concrete. Okay? I could have a circular driveway in front of my house and nothing else, and I can park all the cars I want on that circular driveway. I could have gravel if I want, and I could probably park cars in that gravel. So this whole concept of, I don't like the way that looks, or it's unattractive, that's the price of diversity. You live in a neighborhood and there's diversity. Not everybody has the same value statement that you do. That's just the way it is. And then you have renters versus property owners in the same neighborhood. That's diversity. And so, again, I'm just going to say we've got to be extremely cautious about how we approach this. I'm all about public health, fire safety, in particular now fire safety. In fact, I think there's a huge problem with the potential for fire danger in this community with dead trees and brush and all that. And that's a separate topic, but I mean, I find that to be far more compelling than what this is. And that, of course, caused me... should we prohibit people from leaving their garage doors open? That could be pretty unattractive. I'm not really into using unattractive and the associated property values as a statement. I think safety and public health, I think those are legitimate concerns that we should deal with. But when you start getting into the aesthetics, we have no business treading there. That's going to be just kind of my opening philosophical. I'm interested in trying to come up with some measure of compromise. And again, storage and abandoned stuff. I saw, driving down Highway 50, I happened to glance over El Dorado Hills, very nice homes. As soon as you start coming down in El Dorado Hills, nice homes off to the south. And I saw a very nice, fairly large boat covered, looked very attractive sitting right next to the driveway. Okay? And I'm thinking to myself, what the heck is the problem with that? There is no problem with that, as a matter of fact. So anyway, I'll stop there.
I'd like to also go through Exhibit C. You hit upon some of the same thoughts that went through my mind when I looked at it, that the proposed change is at the same time too restrictive and not restrictive enough. I think that we, as planning commissioners, do have a certain role in helping the community reach a better look, abating blight. If there's something we can adopt that has widespread support, I particularly don't care for the look in Image 1 of 4 parked cars on the lawn. But as you pointed out, and this I have in my own neighborhood, a paved circular driveway with 5 trucks, all of which run at some time or another, looks very similar to Image 1. So the proposed ordinance wouldn't really take care of that look, that kind of junky look of old cars that one of them is a parts car or whatever, needs to be stored there. Image 2, I agree. It just looks like a large lot with an RV stored there. I think it could look better in a perfect world, but that's, what this property owner has chosen. But as you pointed out, image 3 and image 4. Image 3, I would like to actually promote to my eye. That's a beautiful front yard. It's landscaped. It's clean. The colors are, thoughtfully chosen. But that would require the property owner, the parcel owner, to seek a variance from the city to build something like that. Is that, if I understand the argument that's being made by the report? Again, to image 4, that's a planted hedge of probably Photinia that may be, that's not 50% open. It looks solid. I have seen natural landscape of manzanita and toyon that it's at least 8 feet high and on a corner lot here in Placerville. Would it be a planted hedge? Would this apply to planted hedges? Would it just apply to a homeowner who hasn't done any fuel reduction on their lot? So I have a lot of problems. I've realized, that this is very difficult. You have numerous citizens coming to the city complaining about, abandoned cars and sight lines. I did agree with restricting the height of the fence to 30 inches on corner lots. I think that that's a very good part of the ordinance that we should consider adopting, but I'm having a hard time seeing how this is actually going to play out in our city, and if it's really going to satisfy the concerns of the citizens who came forth with their complaints, and then also help us adhere to our general plan. I think this is a very comprehensive staff report and explains our situation, but I got to Exhibit B, where the report says that we are, upholding our general plan goals and policies. We have Goal C and then Goal D to upgrade the visual qualities and functional efficiency of our local streets. If I'm then flipping back to Exhibit C of that image 3 of the nicely landscaped yard, I would want to promote that with our ordinances. I wouldn't want to force that homeowner to seek a variance. Again, I just don't think that, unfortunately, this as drafted is going to take care of our problem of blighted yards. And then as our public commenter said, property rights. People are very, particular about what is allowed in their own front yard. You mentioned, comparing this to CC&Rs. We don't have that. And people who live in those kinds of communities chafe against CC&Rs, so I don't think we want to start going down that path.
And I would just offer that I respect people that choose neighborhoods that have CC&Rs for that type of control and consistency. I have no problem with that. But that's not what we have here. I just another comment. This body has heard this particular item numerous times over the years, and never once has there been anyone present to speak for it. In fact, the comments have always been against it. Now, I concur that it's really disappointing that there's nobody here to speak on this. We did have it the very first time it came to us in this term. We had several people came and spoke, but it does bother me. I would like to I'm wondering if perhaps, just an idea, that perhaps we can deal with the abandon and storage issues as part of the current nuisance ordinance that you brought up, Commissioner Wolf, and maybe we should add that, Pete, go there and say, we can add cars that look like they're abandoned, or even parts cars. I don't support. I have parts cars, or I have. Well, they're in the garage. You don't see them, okay? You only see them if I can turn it on and run it back and forth, okay? But so I wouldn't support having that. I don't support having things up on jacks, even though that's dictating to somebody what they can do with their property. I get that. Things aren't an absolute, but it's far short of an outright prohibition. You may not have this or that or this or that. So I'm wondering if perhaps a better place for the vehicle piece, and I'm not sure which one we're going to tackle first, belongs there. With regards to the yards, the fencing, we have to accept the fact that we have a lot of irregular parcels in this community, and a lot of people don't have a backyard where it's private. And I've made this comment before. And they actually have to use the front yard for their backyard. And then they do want fencing for privacy. And I would submit that if they were prohibited from having that, that could actually decrease the value of their property, because somebody would say, yeah, wow, this is the only place I have to hang out, and I don't have any privacy here. So the argument of property values becomes pretty subjective, I think. So
In that case, I think they could seek a variance, because that is allowed. Now, where is that? It is called out in the draft ordinance.
well,
Right, there you go, section 3. You can
that's
still
true.
seek a variance.
That's true.
So if you have one of those flipped lots, if you will.
Sure.
Most of your space is in the front yard.
But I would hope that we would be able to come up with something that would really minimize the number of folks that would have to come to this body of the city and get a variance for. So that there's a cost associated with that, I'm pretty sure. It's not a freebie, and it's like, why should people have to do that? So anyway, I'll stop there.
Could staff make a couple of comments, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Just a few comments. When you look at the Exhibit A, you're looking at the draft ordinance, you're only looking at the underline and strikeout. So if you look, all the text in there that isn't underlined or strikeout, that is existing code. And so the commission doesn't need to worry about sight distance at intersections. That is the same language that's currently in the code, and we would not change that. It's imperative that we maintain the sight distance from a safety issue. So you really only need to focus on those areas, on those, and there are no strikeouts. So you're looking at that added language that's underlined, where you can modify, change, delete, whatever your desire is. I just want to make sure that you weren't looking at the entirety of this as being new language. I got the impression that maybe the commission thought that was the case. And just a general comment as far as property rights and the like. The city is fully within its police powers to regulate, as is provided here. This is not atypical. In fact, this is very typical language. This is modeled after, at least the fence height portion is modeled after El Dorado County. And I think most every city that I've had a chance to look at provides for a solid fence or hedge or such not to be 3 inches in height, and 50% open up to 6 feet. I mean, that's common. Not discounting any of the comments. But again, I think the commission needs to focus more on, from a planning perspective, does this make planning sense for the city of Placerville based on the goals and objectives that we outlined in the general plan? If you don't feel it is, you can certainly make a recommendation that the city council not approve these. But basically you're looking at that, not taking away from property rights, because every single zone district in the city is heavily regulated. You're only allowed to do certain uses. For example, a single-family residential zone, you can only have single-family uses. You can't put a store or run commercial businesses. You have setbacks all around. You have a height limitation. There are all kinds of coverage limitations and the like. So I'm just pointing out that every property is pretty heavily regulated. This is something that just came out because of some issues that have gone on in the front yards that is visible to the public that generated complaints. And so, therefore the council did, by minute order, I believe, I'm not really sure, there was no resolution of intent to direct staff, but staff was directed by the council to proceed with these ordinance changes. So it wasn't staff generated, as was mentioned earlier. So that's the end of my comments. Thank you.
If I may, just back to staff, and I appreciate that, Pierre. And my comments are not meant to suggest that staff has just created this out of the air. I clearly understand and accept that many jurisdictions have a lot of regulations. I personally don't want to live where they have those. Sometimes those things are necessary. That's really going to be, I think, at the essence of a lot of our discussion, and what is appropriate, and what kind of reasonable compromise can we get to. Certainly when somebody buys something in a residential zone, they know what they're allowed and not allowed to do. The decision is there. What we're talking about doing is coming in after the fact and now changing that. And I think that's a higher standard of review. I do want to point your attention to on page 4 of 6, Exhibit A, item number 2, 2B. Is fences supposed to be underlined there? Front yards may have the following encroachments, provided that in all residential, blah, blah, blah. And then you've added the fences which are 50% or more open. That's the additional language. Otherwise, it would read starting from provided. Front yards may have the
You know,
following
I'd have to
encroachments.
look at the actual code, but I think you're right. It probably, what was added was which are 50% open or more. And Mr. Painter is going to get a copy of our code so I can check. But
Just want
I
to make
think
sure
you're right.
we're starting.
It
this
probably
up.
was fences, comma, provided that in all residential zones, such fence, wall, or hedge is higher
Okay.
than. Yeah.
So
Anyways,
just
we will
to catch that.
we will quickly ascertain.
Yeah, just to
whether
get, you know, when you start doing that stuff, it will sometimes grab more stuff than you expect.
Well, I think I'll echo the comments of probably my other commissioners here, and that is I'm deeply concerned with sort of the one-size-fits-all on this proposed ordinance, both for the fences and for the parking. It's true that most cities have, it's sort of atypical if you don't have an ordinance that deals with parking and fences. However, they're also much more detailed and broken out, other cities. From what I've looked at, both large, small, rural, urban, they're much more detailed. The ordinances to comply with different zoning. So, you know, if you're on 2+ acres, you're probably going to have a different ordinance when it comes to a fence versus if you're in a subdivision, you know, where you have zero lot lines. And so it's kind of hard to say that what was putting forward here is going to work for every property in Placerville. And to Commissioner Friend's remarks, we do have a lot of properties that don't have backyards, that have different types of setbacks that are perpendicular to the street. And it just doesn't quite make sense what's listed here today, what's written here. I do agree, and I wrote this down before, but certainly from the comments and actually from what Mr. Drobish also gave us in terms of the public request, and that is machinery, inoperable vehicles, refuse that are on front yards that have now become either a health hazard or a nuisance hazard because of its abandonment, essentially. I do think we can put together something, whether we refer back to the nuisance section or whether we have something that's part of the fence and parking that maybe refers back to it or adds to it, but that deals with those with that smaller universe. Yes.
Just once again for staff, in a perfect world, we could figure this all out and figure out how to make one size fit all. But the question is occurring to me for staff. What's the impact of doing nothing and just letting it ride here?
Yeah, the impact of doing nothing would mean that someone would have the ability of, first in regards to fences, they could build a solid fence up to 6 feet on the front yard property line. As you see I'll give you one of the examples in the city. That would be image number 6 is an example where somebody had created a contractor storage yard, a complete compound. In other words, the house itself behind doesn't see inside because the 6-foot fence goes around the entire storage yard. But that's, the 20-foot, it's within that 20-foot setback. So you would see that. We discussed before, looking at image 4, and staff concurs with that we were actually discussing maybe it would only apply to a structure, so an actual fence, be it chain link or wood or what have you. but not to natural or not to vegetation, whether hedge or natural, because staff is aware that we're in a very wooded area. There's a lot of situations where natural vegetation is providing a full screening, and we don't want to get involved with the landscaping component. The landscaping would only need to maintain the sight distance at a corner in accordance with that section C1 and that section on 2B. With regards to the regulation of the use of that 20 foot of the front yard setback, well, then people could continue to use it for a certain limit of storage as long as it doesn't become a nuisance under the definition of that section of the code, where then the city could go in and require that they reduce the accumulation of refuse and that sort of thing. With regards to parking of vehicles, typically speaking, if somebody has a parking lot, they can, there's no limits to really the size of the parking lot or anything of that nature. It's just to prevent people from just have ad hoc parking on the lawn, or to prevent people from driving over sidewalks. But that's another violation of the code. So if you have people parking an RV or a vehicle and are driving over the sidewalk to get to that parking spot, well, the violation is an illegal encroachment. They're basically encroaching onto their property from the public right-of-way in an unpermitted manner, and the city could regulate it from that manner as well. So to answer your question, I hope that answers it. So really, the main thing that we would see proliferate would be, again, where somebody opts to build a 6 foot solid fence or wall of some kind up to the property line. So you have to determine whether, from a planning perspective, is that a good thing or a bad thing based on the general plan. And if you don't, you can modify that or recommend denial or forward it on, whatever you wish
I guess
to
that's the
the
question
council.
to us is, I don't particularly care if somebody has a 6 foot solid fence in their front yard, as long as it's not obstructing, becoming a public safety issue.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I'm trying to figure out how to get past the so what test. So if we get 10 more parcels with 6 foot fences in the next 5 years, so what?
And one of the criteria for this has to do with I'm already forgetting the word, beauty, the aesthetic component, right? Okay, so let's go to image 6. Okay, take that fence out. Okay, take the fence away. Take the ugly fence away. Now you're looking at all the vehicles and whatnot there, assuming it's not refuse, assuming it's not trash. Mm-hmm. We had somebody come and talk to us and said, you know what, I drive a big truck, and I can't park it on the street, and I shouldn't be able to park it on the street, and I don't want big rigs parked on the street. I pull it into my property in the front. Okay, staff just said you could pave or gravel. That's allowable, and you can park cars there. Actually, the more I talk about this, the more I think it's actually going to be easier to deal with the parking of cars. That would be the first one. And I'm just going to throw something out to my fellow commissioners. I would say you can park cars as long as it's on a paved or graveled area, so not on lawn. Okay, I would say that, and I know I'm infringing, but I'm looking for some level of compromise. You can park cars there. The cars may not have the appearance of being abandoned, okay, or junk, or otherwise a nuisance. I think you could probably get to some language. Good.
And they would have to use a legal encroachment.
And that's because that's already required. I don't know about the issue of storage, the storage of vehicles. That to me, that's a really interesting piece here. I would think if you're storing it, that really shouldn't be there. And I kind of cringe at myself, because I really don't like the limitation. But I would certainly have no problem with people being able to park cars there. And then I would add the same thing for, RVs are separate, for boats and utility trailers and equipment. Again, if it's on paved or gravel and does not violate the encroachment, I don't have a problem with that. Okay, so I'm comfortable with that position. Okay, and not prohibiting those items. Second, I generally am in agreement that if somebody puts up a fence right on a 6-foot fence right on the property line, that's diversity. That is their right to do it. Now we could probably, and I think I proposed something in the very first meeting, was like for every foot back from that line, the fence could go up another foot from the 3, right? So if you got 6 foot back, you could have your 6-foot fence with some setback. Okay, so there's and that gets to image number 3, because image number 3 is kind of along those lines. Image number 3 is quite attractive. I like that a lot. And we had the discussion about if somebody wanted to create a Mediterranean patio kind of effect, in their yard, particularly if they don't have any other, we should not be in the position to dictate you can't do that. So that's kind of a general direction that I'm comfortable with. The RV, I haven't quite solved the RV. I'd like to also add that if we were to pass this as pass, in addition to the environmental component, which I think is an interesting angle, we would be prejudicing people who have less money, because only the people who have a lot of money to afford offsite storage would then be able to have the toys. And offsite storage is very expensive. It really is. So we would be prejudicing people of lower incomes who might be able to afford that fishing boat. Well, now I can't keep it there, and now I can't afford to store it, so now I can't have one. That's not our intent. So, that boat's free of leaves and doesn't look like it's junk or just sitting there. If you got to keep things in decent repair, that's consistent. That's consistent with keeping your house in good repair. Where is that? We promote and protect. It was C. Yeah. Maintenance of homes, buildings, yards. Maintenance of the things in front. It's okay. Keep it from looking like abandoned junk. That's blight to me. Abandoned junk is blight. So I think that's a fairly reasonable, and that's about as far as I'd be willing to go. Sorry.
So does this get back to your so what? Well, I actually do like the idea of the RV does give me a little bit of heartburn, only because I guess you could have a yacht in your front yard, but aside from we know the size of a boat, we know the size of a vehicle. An RV can really, if it's parked in the front yard, could really take away your line of sight, some other things, and sort of be a nuisance. Which is why a lot of the older houses actually have RV parking on the side of the houses that were zoned that way to begin with. Boats, recreational vehicles, if they're on paved, if they're on gravel, I don't have too much of a problem with that. RV, I think, is a little bit different because of the size of it and the ability to really block maybe your neighbor's view as well, versus a car or a boat. So although I don't know if we can just single them out as well, though.
If you consider an RV as essentially a house on wheels, then you could perhaps make an argument that the RV has to be subject to the same setbacks, right, that the house does, right, or something like that. So that might provide some measure. The exhibit, I think, to make the case, image 2 was not the best photo to make the case for this. In my view, this is causing no harm. And particularly, since it doesn't look like it's abandoned, it doesn't look like it's dirty or covered with leaves or anything. It looks like it just got there, just pulled up. Hey, Clark! Right? So, I think similar to the fence, and you might be able to come up with some formula for size. A 40-foot RV is a lot different than a 23-foot RV. They're both large, and same thing, even with a trailer.
Well, exactly. Well, and here too, on image 2, this looks like an acre plus type of lot versus, someone that has a, 10,000 square foot, pad, where you might be taking up the entire driveway plus maybe the sidewalk and everything else, which would then, you'd be in conflict with with a different ordinance anyways. So, no, Peter.
Continuing my drifty questions for staff, I'm remembering something that I've learned over the years about that applies to site development. Would there be any mechanism here where we could somehow connect to that concept of floor area ratio? Like if the lot is smaller and the RV is bigger, there's some limitation there that might give you the control. If the lot is bigger, so what if the RV is bigger? It's just like you can't buy a 10,000 square foot lot and build a 9,500 square foot house on it. I mean, that's buried in that book somewhere in the ordinance. I'm just wondering, does that get any traction with anybody?
Staff could certainly cause that recreational vehicle to be reparked if it runs afoul of that triangle that's formed with the intersection of the right-of-way. So we can certainly carry it that forward. But looking at proposed Section 2D, it looks like if the commission doesn't have an issue with recreational vehicles, votes, utility trailers, etc., not being permitted in the front yard, you can just strike that section and you can just say the parking or storage of vehicles shall be within a paved or gravel driveway accessible via a permitted encroachment. I was getting the sense that the commission was sort of okay with that. It was the second half of that portion that was causing problems. So you could just take that out and now maybe discuss if there's issues with the parking or storage. And parking or storage are kind of almost synonymous in a way. The city doesn't permit abandoned cars in the front yard, so if there's a car sitting there with expired tags, well, they have to be inside or hidden. They'll be cited and towed away if they don't have current tags. So that's again a separate issue. So really, it was to control just having cars parking ad hoc all over the yard. But again, you could look at just some slight modifications to 2D, and I think it gets the commission pretty close to where you're all sort of on the same page. So maybe you look at that, just striking that last section.
A question for Pierre. Do you believe that the current nuisance ordinance is sufficient to cover abandoned/junk cars? Because again, I think
Yes.
I do have some sensitivity to that piece, even though it's on private property. I mean, I have some. I can see that's a reasonable compromise. I think if you want to work on your car, you're going to have to put it in a garage. You're going to have to build a structure to cover it. I mean, I don't have a real issue with that per se. It's not pure, right? But again, we do live in neighborhoods, and while we have diversity, we also have to try to be good neighbors.
Well, an owner can still have work on their car in their driveway. There's no regulation against that. But if that car has expired tags, well, then that's an inoperative vehicle, and that's under a section part of the code, and that car would need to be removed. That would go under the police department.
But even the appearance, if the car is just covered in dirt and leaves and cobwebs, even with the tags are current, I mean, that's not getting at the whole beauty thing, right? That was the purpose for this, right? It's in the staff report.
I don't think the city wants to get into whether somebody's washing their car or not. I think it's the issue of the abandoned car is a car that doesn't have current tags, and of course the city can go after that. So again, I think to stay focused, if you look at that section of the code 2D, my sense from what I've heard from the commission is it's that second half after the semicolon that the commission doesn't seem to be comfortable with. Recreational vehicles, boats, etc., shall not be permitted within the front yard. You don't like that, so maybe that comes out. And so as long as it's within a paved or gravel driveway accessible via a permitted encroachment, that's okay.
All right. So, and again, Mr. Chairman, please cut me off if I'm monopolizing the discussion. I just want to make sure I'm clear with staff. So if we go to image 1 on Exhibit C, and if those vehicles were parked not on grass but were parked on paved or gravel, and it appears to me they could easily access what I presume is the entitled encroachment, then what you're saying, Pierre, that would be okay. That the city is not really that concerned about that.
Well, staff can throw something out. First of all, just sort of apologize for these images. Sometime earlier, the commission requested images, and I don't want the decision-making on these images. And it was kind of sensitive from staff's perspective. We didn't want to come off as being biased. We want to be Switzerland in this situation and be very, very neutral and come from a planning perspective. And so that's why you see in image 3, I mean, it's a very, very nice fence, obviously 6 feet high within that front yard setback. But it's nice. We didn't want to show stuff that was sort of looking at, well, staff is presenting a bias. So we probably, hindsight's 2020, staff probably should have provided maybe a little bit more pictures of real examples in the city of Placerville, where image 3 is not in the city. Image 1 and 2 also is not in the city. Image 4, 5, and 6 are examples that are in the city. In fact, 4, 5, and 6 are all on the same street, Columbus Street. You probably all recognize them.
But I'm not
the
sure. I'm
chairman
not sure
does.
that's answering. I'm not sure that's getting to my point. My point is that if that area were paved or graveled, then what we're talking about, that would be okay. And what I kind of heard you say, the city does not want to get into the storage of vehicles or even the vehicles being clean and all that. So that's not part of the aesthetic beauty piece that was one of the arguments for driving this. I just want to make clear, and I would agree with, I support that. By the way, I rarely criticize staff. On page 2 of the staff report, though, I found something very prejudicial. Paragraph 3, in the second line, right after Exhibit B, it says unfortunately, and I thought that was an interesting word to say, as opposed to simply being factual and saying existing zoning does not address this. The word unfortunately struck me as staff having a kind of a definite position on where this. You found where I'm at
Yes.
under discussion. So that kind of struck me. And I'm sure there was no intent there, but normally if it was just purely objective, we wouldn't be saying fortunately, unfortunately, or it's really too bad or whatever. Just
Yeah,
an
staff
aside.
agrees with that.
Just an aside.
Staff wishes it would have softened that language.
I didn't take an issue. In fact, I thought, unfortunately, pointed out how difficult this really is. Unfortunately, everything on here is currently allowed, and that's what makes this so difficult. But
Yeah, one of the more egregious examples, and we probably all know, if you're driving north on Spring Street off of Highway 50 and you're taking that turn, in the outside part of the turn, there's a car there that drives over the sidewalk and created a parking spot right on the lawn. This ordinance would prohibit that. That's already prohibited. The city will eventually, when it finds the time, notify that property owner that that you can't legally drive over sidewalks. But that would be an example that if it was able to negotiate through its driveway, its legal access, it could park there if that was part of the parking area or driveway, if you will.
Mr. Chairman, I would support language in, I'm dealing just with 2D right now, so I'm going to deal with the parking or storage. I could deal with this, and as staff suggested, ending with encroachment, striking everything else out. Although I asked the question if we need to be clear, probably don't. Boats, utilities, traders, equipment, similar items are also permitted, or if we can just be quiet, silent on that, and just leave it alone. Part of me wants to be specific and say it's okay to have that, so there's no question about it. I would pull the I'd pull the recreational vehicles out and kind of come up with some language under 10-1-4. So I wouldn't even have RVs in there. The question is, do we want any language that says boats, utility trailers, equipment, and similar items are similarly permitted, as are the vehicles, as long as it's on paved or gravel driveways. And I kind of like that because it shows that we addressed that, we dealt with it, as opposed to being silent. A lot of times things are silent and then people are wondering. So I would throw that as being able to accept this paragraph. That gets like almost one of the three issues off the table. So I don't know how my fellow commissioners feel about that.
I think that's a good idea. I want to see where we go with the fence height.
Yeah, I'm okay with that too. I do think I want to pull recreational vehicles out as well, though, because I think RVs are just a different beast. We can do that.
Do we want to take a vote on this item first, or do we want to take one? We're going to come up with everything and vote
Put it into one.
and put it into one. How do you wish to proceed?
You want to add, just to understand, you want to add,
I'll read the language. Here's what I would. I'll do it. I'll do it as a motion. So I would propose that 2D read that parking or storage of vehicles. Let's see. I want to make sure I get this right with everything else. Parking or storage of vehicles are permitted within a paved or gravel driveway accessible via a permitted encroachment, period. Boats, utility trailers, equipment, and similar items shall be similarly permitted, period. Okay, no, shall be similarly permitted within the front yard. Sorry, within the front yard is important. Shall be similarly permitted within the front yard. It leaves out the.
say they already, it's already in the front yard because that's what item 2 says. Front
Oh,
yard
okay.
may have the following
Okay, then we don't. Then we could strike within the front yard and just leave similarly permitted. So that shows we've addressed it, and that we're taking out the RV vehicles. We'll deal with them later. That would be my motion.
I'll second that motion.
Any discussion?
I just want to make sure that I'm clear on the change in 2D. So we aren't going to allow parking or storage of recreational vehicles, boats, utility trailers, and similar items?
No, we are.
We are. We're making it
not RVs.
permissive
But we're
language.
taking
RV
out
RVs.
only the recreational vehicles.
Correct. But these vehicles and items must be within a paved or graveled driveway. Now the other question is driveway or area. So
Gravel driveway.
because we've already had a discussion. If you pave or gravel what would otherwise be a front yard, and you may park vehicles there, staff has already said that. So I think the term driveway needs to come out. So it would be a paved or graveled area accessible. So I would take driveway out. I'd have to modify my motion to that.
And then just, I
Good.
accept a friendly modification there. It just occurs to me, what about the person that has their boat parked in the dirt in their, well, we're only talking about front yards. So it's dirt, so it's not paved or gravel.
I think you got to put a little bit of gravel down.
Yeah,
I don't necessarily have a
got to go
problem.
buy a couple cubic yards at Home Depot at least. Yeah,
Just for the wheels, anyway.
yeah.
Right.
If staff could just interject, driveway means any area where you park or drive your vehicles.
So even if an area that would normally be considered a front yard is graveled and or
Driveway,
paved, you would consider that a driveway?
yes.
Okay.
In other words, we're not differentiating between a driveway and a parking lot in the front yard of a single-family residential zone lot.
Okay. All right. That's a nuance I
Yeah,
personally would
it's
not
a nuance,
realize. I
but,
mean, a driveway
yeah.
to me is a very specific paved or gravel area that goes in a straight line to that. So, okay.
Andrew?
Yeah, I hesitate stepping in the fray here, but I'm trying to think of a way to simplify the motion made by Member Friend. The second part of the motion related to the list of other vehicles. Could could not that list be included?
It could.
Right after the words, right
Yes.
after the word vehicles?
Yes.
Or change the tense.
So you would suggest that parking or
plural.
storage of vehicles, boats, utility trailers, equipment, and similar items?
Yeah.
Yeah, we absolutely, it absolutely could be done, it would be the
That way
exact
you
same
wouldn't
thing.
just have one sentence. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that makes
I
makes
don't know
sense.
if it's easy to withdraw the motion or simply modify the language, so.
Modify.
Okay, so I'm going to amend my motion. So that 2D will read, I hope I get this right. Parking or storage of vehicles, boats, utility trailers, equipment, and similar items are permitted within a paved or gravelled driveway.
Accessible via.
Oh, I'm
permitted
sorry,
encroachment.
thank you, accessible via a permitted encroachment. That'd be my amended motion.
Or we have a second. Further discussion?
Let's call the question.
Okay, so let's go ahead and do a roll call on that,
2D only?
on 2D only.
Okay.
Member Friend,
Aye.
Member Wolf,
Aye.
Member Keeney,
Aye.
Vice Chair Saragosa, excuse me, Chair Pro Tem Saragosa.
Aye.
He's the real chair.
Technically, it doesn't go into effect until the following meeting, but yeah.
Not until we have the election party.
Okay, so that measure passes 4-0. You want to now entertain fences? Let's move on to fences. Discussion?
Well, I'm just going to throw out that I'd be absolutely comfortable with a 1 foot increased fence height for every 1 foot setback from the property line. To a
Increase
max,
from what?
from the 3 feet, because right now it's already 3 feet, correct? With the sight distance, is controlling. You can't. I don't care. You may only be able to have 3 feet based on sight distance, but in the absence of a concern or conflict with sight distance, then for every foot back from your property line, you can go another foot over the 3 to a maximum of 6. I'm going to start there and see where the bidding goes.
If we did not prohibit 6-foot-high fences, then the aesthetics of image 1, image 2 could be mitigated with a 6-foot-high fence right at in the front yard. It wouldn't stop the accumulation that might hide from sight abandoned vehicles, but let's presume that in image 1 in particular, where you have 4 cars parked, let's say that they're all licensed and running and being used by the occupants of the house. From that would mitigate the look from the street and therefore reduce complaints that the city would receive from having that would also have to be paved under 2D, but if that was all paved, then it could be sheltered from the view with a taller fence. A 3-foot-high fence wouldn't do anything for that.
So, Commissioner, what I'm hearing, and make sure I'm clear. 6-foot-high fence is okay with you, and you're saying even right at the property line is okay? And I'm not necessarily opposed to that.
Yeah, I as I said before, it restricting the fence height, it poses as many problems as it solves, and so I'm just not comfortable in not allowing there to be taller, solid fences higher than 3 feet.
Right at the property. I think the issue is right at the property.
Right at the-
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, in the front yard.
Just
The front
so I'm
yard is
clear.
the
Yep.
20 feet, within the 20 feet setback.
Yeah, okay.
But isn't,
Make the motion.
even if it's allowed in the zoning, if there are traffic concerns and safety concerns, those override
Right.
the zoning ordinance, correct?
I would,
Correct. That's already handled. That's not
always-
being
that's always
considered.
there.
All you're looking at is basically regulating the fence heights within the front yard setback, which is that 20-foot distance
All right, so
from
when
the
the-
property line into the property.
All right, so when an application comes in and they've got that 6-foot fence that's in a place that's going to be difficult and have safety issues, the city engineer picks that up and it becomes a condition of approval or whatever.
Well, there's no permitting for fences, and so it gets built. So until we see that or we get a complaint,
Then you go back.
we
Okay.
go back and we make them
But you have,
trim it down
but
within
you have
that
legal
triangle.
standing to do that.
Oh,
when you go back.
absolutely. Yeah,
okay.
they can't block sight distance, and that's only at intersections. So
So to me, that just says 6 feet and forget about it.
At the lot line.
Yeah,
At the lot line.
yeah.
We have a motion.
Well, how would we do this? Just strike 2A? Or would we need to state it in the positive? Front yards may have a fence, a solid fence or hedge at a maximum of 6 feet in height?
We would have to modify C1 and
C1.
C2.
Strike C2. And strike C-
staff's recommendation would be that you just delete what was added by staff. The staff imposed new regulations to basically require that within that setback you have a 3-foot solid fence up to 6 feet, then 50% open. We can go back to the original code that allows a fence, wall, or hedge no higher than 6 feet above natural ground. That's existing language. We would take out all that staff added in to further regulate that. It
so in
sounds like
C1, you
if
would
you're
take
fine
out
with
side
that.
and rear. You would take out side and rear because that would be on the required yards, right? That's all yards then. Front yard is treated the same as all yards. So you would take out side and rear.
Correct.
So you're just going to be left with, like you said, the original language, and then 2A, B, and C. Now hold it, before we go there, we're talking about 2A and B would come out then.
Well, what staff can do too is if it's going to be difficult, staff can come back then with a new draft that sort of reflects the action you're taking, which I think is you're looking at basically regulating the parking of vehicles, boats, and trailers and the like within a driveway
Right.
through illegal encroachment.
That actually might
That's
not
the
be a-
only real change. Everything else is to remain the same. Earlier, Commissioner Friend had a question on 2B that maybe fences shouldn't have been underlined. Well, I see why it's like that. It's because originally there wasn't a 2B at all. There was just the C1
Gotcha.
because it addressed all
There was nothing
yards.
else. Right.
And so now we don't need to have that 2B at all. We'll remove that entirely along with 2A and 2C. And so really you're just going to see the addition of a D. So we'll go back
Well,
to the original
2C real
code.
fast
It's different.
is different. Other structures not exceeding 30 inches in height. So this would be like a gazebo or a shed or what are we talking about?
Yeah,
in
that
terms
was
of other
language
structures?
that we took out of the county's code, and that was where you may have some kind of utility box or something like that. We didn't want, because we were looking at restricting, really not allowing anything really much to go on except landscaping in the front yard. We didn't want to we didn't want people to not be able to put in, like maybe that's where there'd be an air conditioning unit or something like that nature that's under 30 inches could be in the front yard.
What if you wanted a gazebo in your front yard? Would that not be allowed? I mean, if you had this,
It would-
you had a
it would-
big enough setback.
It wouldn't be allowed under our typical setbacks for structures. That's a different part of the code, not addressed here.
Yeah, it would have to be set back to that setback.
Yeah.
So we don't have to worry about storage sheds and that sort
No,
of thing.
you don't have to
Okay.
worry about
Okay.
storage
Okay,
sheds,
that's-
structures, gazebos, all that. That
Already
still has to maintain the setback.
Understood.
This
Okay.
was just looking at fences and vehicles and equipment and boats and RVs.
So
and
C
that
can
kind
come
of
out then.
Yep.
Okay.
So very, very simple changes you're making. It'll be easy to come back then with the draft ordinance, hopefully that comports with what the commission
That
would like
actually
to
I
see.
think would be helpful, and also for
Yeah.
I think for the public as well,
Oh,
so
sure.
that they had another chance to see sort of finished language, and then we can move forward.
So point of order,
Yeah, they need a vote.
there was no motion or second regarding what we just talked about. So I
The
just want
fence
to make that
height.
for the record. Yeah.
That's true. Okay.
Okay. Well, I'd like to make a motion then, that we have staff revise the draft ordinance to delete what is now 2A, solid fences, walls, or hedges not exceeding 3 feet in height, and then to show the original language of the ordinance to C1, striking the words side and rear, which are underlined on our
Yeah,
copies.
sorry to interrupt, but Mr. Chairman, if staff could just make a suggestion. Basically, I think the commission should take its action on the fence height issue alone, and then maybe a third action directing staff to come back with the revised ordinance for final recommendation by the commission.
Okay.
It's cleaner that way.
So then I'll change my motion to,
Don't you agree?
so then what is my motion? Let's see.
We took
To allow the fences 6 feet in height.
So you would probably move something along the lines of fences up to 6 feet in height shall be allowed in the front yards. So that,
Yeah, solid fences, walls,
fences, yeah.
hedges.
Yeah, staff would recommend that basically your motion would be that a fence, wall, or hedge no higher than 6 feet above natural ground as currently allowed in the code remain the same.
Can I just say what he said?
Say so moved.
So moved.
I'll second it.
discussion.
I didn't mean to push you there.
All right. Call the roll.
Member Keeney,
Aye.
Member Wolf,
Aye.
Chair Pro Tem Saragosa,
Aye.
Member Friend.
Aye.
All right.
Now your last motion will be direct staff to come back with a cleaned up version of that basically will take the existing code reflecting the commission's changes.
We have one more, agreed. We'll have one more discussion now, and that is on recreational vehicles.
Well, he was asking for
Wait,
a motion
we
there.
need to make a motion on that to direct staff?
Well, I think what the chair is suggesting is that we're more than likely going to add some change or something about RVs, and then we'll,
Then
Say
we'll
do
direct
that.
staff.
wait. Yeah, and then we'll direct staff to come back with cleaned up language that reflects our motions and our intent, I think.
That's good.
Just point of order, a question about the last motion and adoption thereof. Was it the intent of the motion maker and the seconder to not recommend adoption of the other underlined items under 2A, B, and C? I believe the motion was just related to
The six
our C1.
C1.
Aren't we just taking out all this other stuff?
It
You-
was my
you could-
intent for you to delete what is now 2A.
It could easily be resolved by another motion and second to address item, the 2A, B, and C if the commission so chooses. In essence,
I make a motion that
yeah.
we remove item 2, section A, B, and C.
just clarification, you mean the underlined portion thereof?
I'll
I
second
think
it.
it's so for the discussion. I think that the challenge with that is we really are only asking staff to remove the language they've introduced, which is the underline side and rear in C1, and then 2A, 2B, the first sentence, I believe. I'm unclear if 2, front yards may have the following encroachments already exists. Is that new language?
It's underlined. That's new language.
But we're going to need
We're gonna need
that.
that.
Are we
Yes.
going to need that?
For D,
Yeah.
So,
So we want to. So I'll amend my. I will amend my motion to strike out of section 2, point A and B and C. And I believe side and rear was already covered in the original motion on the 6-foot wall.
The second
Or,
concurs.
We're gonna actually make a motion to ask staff to bring back revised
all this
language
stuff.
that really reflects the actions that we've taken.
Correct.
And even where there may be some inconsistencies, I think staff's gonna be able to figure it out.
So we have a second.
So just a question on that. So 2C remains?
No.
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 Point A, B, and C to remove A, B, and C. In section 2. We have a second.
And I'm sorry, I hate to complicate things,
That's
but then C1, we were going to remove, let's see, I think we need to remove side and rear that the staff added in.
Let's just do it anyway.
Yeah, that was the
Yeah,
first
so
motion.
I will amend again and add in section for C and under item 1, the language side and rear. To delete.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Seems reasonable. I'll second it again.
I think that actually was already taken, but-
Yeah, I didn't think so.
Reinforcement.
And then section 3.
All right, so I'm gonna. Do we have? Let's go ahead and call a roll on that. On that second.
Let's see, I didn't catch the second. Who made the second?
Oh,
It was done by Mr. Wolf.
Thank you. Chair Pro Tem Zaragoza.
Aye.
Member Wolf.
Aye.
Member Friend.
Aye.
Member Keeney.
aye.
And then staff would point out then there's C3 that based on the direction of the commission, that should also be removed.
Isn't it theoretically possible? I'm envisioning something on maybe a particular slope, which could possibly warrant, for privacy or other concerns, a fence higher than the 6 foot, just as we allow higher 6-foot fences now. I think we still need a variance procedure.
I think there's a section of the code,
Yeah,
Mr.
that's
Painter
why-
can correct me if I'm wrong, that requires a conditional use permit for a fence higher than 6 feet. That also requires a building permit, and
I don't see any harm with leaving that there.
I agree. I think we should always have a variance, yeah,
Yeah, I have.
because of the topography.
Absolutely,
It's
because
so
of topography.
unpredictable.
Absolutely, yes.
I had purposely left.
we can leave it in.
So,
Okay.
Assuming we're going to talk about RVs. I have a
RVs.
question.
Yes.
For my fellow commissioners.
Yes.
Would it make sense, and it's just a question, I'm not lobbying, would it make sense because the biggest issue with RVs is when people park them in the front yard, is to just limit them from the front yards? And so that's going to create some problems for some people, but most of the time, people will be able to figure out something. Or is that too restrictive also? Of course, now we can put up a 6-foot fence and we won't see the RV. So,
No,
You'll
there
still
are
see
no,
the
there are
RV.
no RVs below 6 feet.
Can staff comment on that? All that does is add a definition. Doesn't regulate anything.
Yeah.
It's just the term. So
Okay.
But we're we're considering maybe adding regulations to that section.
I thought you were just considering
No,
that
I
term.
think, my
thought we
my
were.
understanding is that we were gonna, and I would actually even add, we have utility trailers are okay up top, but house trailers, which have the same size mass presence as RVs, I would also probably add them in as well, frankly.
I would think that maybe those are covered in other kind of areas of the code. That might be a question of staff too.
Is that not also
'Cause,
a
like, what's
a
a house
motorhome?
trailer?
I'm not,
An RV and a motorhome, I think, is synonymous.
okay, so that's in the language of 10.1.4, truck, camper, and motorhome.
Travel trailer, I'm sorry, it's already covered there.
I'm not here. I thought he left all that in.
That's great.
Personal
It's
vehicles,
covered.
boats,
That's
trailers.
covered. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm comfortable with the definition. I'm comfortable with the definition. I think, I would presume then the issue is really one of scale, right? And.
My
I mean,
apologies,
go
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman. Can staff
Yes.
ask a question?
Yes.
Earlier motion, I think it was Commissioner Friend on that section D. I was under the impression that we left in, as long as it's parked on a paved or gravel driveway, we left in recreational parking and storage of vehicles, recreational vehicles, boats, utility trailers, equipment.
No,
somewhere
RVs,
else.
RVs came out.
RVs came
and
out.
utility trailers are very different in definition than camping trailer as
That's
you
great.
have in a, so, yeah,
Okay.
they're very different.
Yeah, thank you for the
Correct,
clarification.
yes, thank you for asking. Boy, this is conflicting. But what is the distinction? What is the distinction theoretically or intent-wise between an RV, and we can even use this exhibit, image 2. Okay, so first of all, before I even ask the question, I'm clear that there has to be some accommodation for the relationship between parcel size and the vehicle. Because I wouldn't pass a motion prohibiting what I'm seeing here in image 2. I don't see this as a problem at all. On the other hand, I think of my personal property where I live, now of course it would violate the encroachment, but let's for discussion's sake, say that I could actually maneuver an RV like this or a trailer onto my side yard right on the property line next to my neighbor, okay? It would be very large and monolithic, right? And I don't think it would be, appropriate there. And I realize that this is really a difficult place to be, but I think the only thing I'm comfortable doing with this is having some measure of scale. Because I couldn't put a shed, for example. You could probably put a shed right here, right where this RV is. I would presume in image 2, you could probably put a shed right there. My guess is, or maybe slightly to the left of where it is. Okay, it looks like there's plenty of room.
If the shed was in the setback, no,
Yeah.
it could not be.
Yeah, so I'm wondering if somehow RVs have to meet the same setback, these trailers have to meet the same setback requirements as would sheds and similar structures. I'm just going to throw that out. This is pretty sticky, and I want to hold to the principles that I laid out earlier this evening, because I think they should still be applied, but I can see, how the RV presents a more difficult problem, and including the trailers. And for the record, I own an RV, okay, but I don't park it at my house. I'm fortunate to have another option, but I own one, and so I understand the issue.
I'm trying to come up with the right language to see how we deal with an RV, because I do agree they're a different animal than, what's the criteria for us to do it, if to be consistent across the board from where we're going. Maybe we use the setback. Is it that they have to have ample side parking so that they can be stored on a side side of their house? Image 2, I don't have a problem with that either. I think there's plenty of room there, but there's plenty of properties in the city that would not have a very small pad
space, right.
in order to park something like that.
And I'm going to ask another question, again, going back to my RV and my personal experience. So I have what I consider to be a driveway, okay? Comes right off the street, goes to a garage. And I have parked my RV in that spot when, getting it ready to take it up to the high country. And first of all, nothing that we do here, I think, should preclude that, okay? That's a temporary. The question is that different, and should it be considered differently than the side yard. Now, parking it there would be consistent with side setbacks. It wouldn't be consistent with the front setback, right? Because the RV basically takes up the driveway. So it wouldn't be, it's not in the street, it's in the driveway itself, but it's not encroaching on the side yard or the side property line. And I'm wondering if maybe the setback is perhaps the most objective. If you've got enough property that you can still meet setback requirements, then you can have an RV. And so we're treating it almost the same as any other structure at that point. Just because it's on wheels, maybe doesn't make a difference. I think it's about the only thing I might be the most comfortable with. And that would, but that, accepting that individuals, should be allowed the temporary parking. I'm sure the city's got an idea of how they would measure temporary parking. of RVs.
72 hours, I think.
Okay, great. If that exists, then that exists. That's wonderful. I think I'm comfortable with that. I don't know how everybody else feels.
I'm just still struggling with what's the scale of the problem. I looked through this list of complaints, and none of them seem to, and those go back several years, none of them seem to be directly related to an RV parking issue. Are we getting other complaints, or is this just an impression? Because that's where I'm headed, is maybe it's so what?
Yeah, the complaints mainly had to do with fence height and then the
Ugly
storage
stuff.
of vehicles and such in the front yards, not RVs being singled out.
So it occurs to me, we're going through a lot of what ifs and hypotheticals here, but if somebody has an RV that's too big and they jam it in their side yard setback and it's, depriving their neighbors of their light and ventilation or their tomatoes from light, that's a different situation. And that could be dealt with on the nuisance abatement side of things, I would think.
No, unless it's prohibited. Right now, you're permitted to park an RV on the side of your house
Right, but
in the setback.
But the guy that brings in his big tractor trailer rig and he's blocking out the sun of the neighbor, blocking their access to light and ventilation, that sure as heck sounds like a safety issue to me, or health and safety issue.
Well, it's a planning issue, and so I think that's where your focus should be. What are the planning issues here, and what are the reasons for having the yards? You have rear and side yard for a place to recreate, but also for light and air, and so and a buffer. And so
Not
if
the
you
way
have
houses are built now.
a very large RV parked on a side yard where typically you're only going to have a 5 or 10-foot setback, you may have a little bit more. So if you squeeze in that RV, you're effectively then eliminating the interfering with light and air to your neighbors.
Which you guys would have, the city would have recourse to address, because it's a health and safety issue.
No, there's nothing prohibiting somebody from parking an RV if there's space in a side yard.
If one property owner is prohibiting the other one from having suitable light and ventilation in their property, there's no redress?
No.
I think there actually is starting to have case law. If you have trees so tall that you're blocking out somebody's ability to have solar, now it bothers me a lot.
Yeah.
But I have read, we're in California, by the way, I have read that, but there's no right, there's really no right to a view.
There's there's right to light and air.
But sure, but you're all open on one side. I think you'd be hard pressed to prove you're not getting any light or air on that side. And if somebody planted a tree, I could plant a tree there. In fact, I'm going to have to put out exterior grow lights, so I can have raised beds for radishes and tomatoes, because there's so much shade where I live. So I don't think you can do that.
No, again,
that's
staff
strange.
will
That's
state
taking us
again,
back to the
there
19th
is no
century.
recourse that if somebody complains about an RV parked in any yard, it's not in violation of any code or ordinance.
Yeah, that's why I think we probably do need to have some language here. Personally, I think there should be some language surrounding RVs that are different than boats, utility trailers, and equipment and similar items.
So maybe since the problem is bigger, no pun intended, the restriction should be bigger. So maybe we just limit it to you just can't park RVs in setbacks.
Or I'd make it permissive. RVs are permissible so long as they meet setback requirements.
Yeah.
Okay, I would do that.
And staff would just point out as well, and that's one of the reasons why I think we put this in here is a lot of jurisdictions do regulate the parking of RVs in that manner because it's very simple. It's treated like a structure because you're not going on vacation all the time. It's once in a while, and that RV is in the same spot for a long period of time.
That sounds like motion language to me.
Would this also include, or do we need to add trailered houses, which are becoming more and more popular? In fact, we have a cabin park manufacturer, right? Small houses.
Like mini houses.
So do we need to add the term trailered houses?
We'll add that to the definition. Yeah, the city planner was just letting me know that that's an easy fix. We can add that to the recreational vehicle definition. Or define it separately if it's not a recreational vehicle. And we can bring that back to you.
So this is sort of the applicant agent kicking in here.
Right.
Would that mean, I guess this is kind of a shared question for staff and the commission. Would that mean if I want to have my little mini house on a trailer and I bring it on a lot and it's not in any of the setbacks, would the city not still have jurisdiction over the power, utility, sanitation hookups for that vehicle?
It is a vehicle. It is licensed through the Department of Motor Vehicles. And you can't live in it.
Well, that's what I'm getting at. What's the
Yeah, that's probably outside of where we're going, but no, you can't live in it just like you can't live in a recreational vehicle on the property. It's not permitted.
The only valid place to do that would be a recreational vehicle park, which the city does not have any of those currently.
Why couldn't it be a
But
second?
KOA down the hill, that would be
Do we
an
have any
example.
permitted mini houses in the city?
No.
Okay.
Not as you've defined them, but stick built with foundations. Yeah.
We do have some of those?
We do not. We don't have any mini existing.
Not as defined with on a chassis that are
that's a
licensed.
different-
No,
that's
we
a
have
different
not.
animal.
Yeah.
But if somebody were to come in with a permit to build a small house, as long as it met all the applicable building codes, they could do that.
All right, I didn't mean to
But it's
digress.
probably outside of
I'll make a motion, Mr. Chairman.
Yep.
Roman numeral 2 recreational vehicles. A, City Code Section 10-1-4 shall define recreational vehicles as, then it'll be the language that you have there. Does that make sense? Okay. So Roman numeral 2, A, Roman numeral 2 says recreational vehicles. Subsection A is recreational, City Code, how do I want to do this? Oh, definition. A, subsection A is going to be definition. Recreational, City Code Section 10-4-1.
Staff would
Do I need to
recommend
say
that-
that, or do I just need to put
Yeah,
definition?
well,
Skip that
basically, you don't want to change the definition unless you want.
No. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the permission language. So I need to have subsection A is the definition, subsection B, recreational vehicles as defined in subsection A shall be permissible so long as they meet setback requirements. So all I'm trying to do is Roman numeral 2 should be titled recreational vehicles. A, subsection A of Roman numeral 2 shall be the definition as written here. And then B, recreational vehicles shall be permissible in front yards so long as they meet
Okay, then what you're
setback
doing.
requirements.
I
Okay,
think
yeah,
that was-
staff can
Should that be
interject.
part
I
of
think
two?
what you're doing.
It's still
yeah,
part of
let
the
me
front
handle
yard.
this.
It's
So,
still being
so under
part of
yards,
Roman
you
numeral
have
two.
section 1 and you have section 2. Section
about
2
Roman
is
numeral two.
strictly a recreational vehicle definition. If you want to leave that in, I would just move to leave that in. You're going to add the regulation under Roman numeral 1
Oh, why wouldn't I add it under Roman numeral 2?
because that's just a that's just a definition. It's not a regulatory
Shouldn't the
section.
in a
definition
different section
precede
of-
the regulation?
It would-
No, we don't want
it's
regulations in the
10-1-4.
definition.
Okay,
So
that was
if
my
you-
question.
If you wanted to, if you want to regulate now, we're going to insert that under 10-4-3 yards to
it's
restrict.
part of the encroachment.
Right, so it'll be, we'll add that section probably under C. It'll just
Oh, I'm sorry.
address parking is only.
What I'm
is-
not seeing here is that 10-1-4 actually comes in the code before
Yes,
10-.
correct.
I'm sorry.
Right, but
Correct,
that's
so it's not
just,
sequential.
yeah.
So the
But
definition
be that as
is-
it may, it's
Gotcha.
it's just a definition.
All right.
So,
Well,
but I understand where you're going.
All right.
I would like
We,
to,
staff will just insert that, whatever language you want appropriately under the yard section when we
Okay.
bring that back to you.
Well, there's no second to my motion, so that's just
I'll
chattering.
second it.
Oh, I'd like to hear what Commissioner
discussion?
Keen was certainly going, she was
So
going
let's
to.
have we're opening for discussion. I think it'd be a lot simpler just to adopt that definition separately. And so we agree with staff's recommendation of this definition of what a recreational vehicle is. Then, as far as regulating where they can be placed on the property, that's a change I think we should allow the public to comment on. And I think it's a good one to talk about these setbacks where an RV can be on the property. But
This is coming back, this is coming back for action, right? It's going to, yeah, this is coming back for
Correct.
public, another
right,
public
so
hearing.
rather than trying to blend the two.
Oh,
as
no,
you were
no,
trying
I'm
to-
sorry. Yeah, I completely agree. I didn't understand the layout in code.
So in a future planning commission meeting, we can discuss then where the recreational vehicle would be on the property and open that up again for public comment or a
Well, I'm
public
gonna-
hearing.
I think we can go ahead and go ahead and state it, and the language, everything's got to come back for public hearing anyway.
Okay.
So people can participate. So I'm going to amend my motion to read that we adopt the definition of recreational vehicle as specified here with the inclusion of trailered homes being added to that definition. And that we add language in the appropriate part of section Roman numeral 1, recreational vehicles as defined shall be permissible in front yards so long as they meet setback requirements. Oh, yeah, of any yard, shall be permissible in any yard so long as they meet a setback requirements. That'd be the motion.
I concur. It's the second door.
I want to ask staff if is that?
Yeah, staff may modify that language
Okay.
slightly, but it may be something like the parking of recreational vehicles
okay,
is
fair
defined will
enough.
be allowed on a lot, meeting all setbacks, something
Great.
like that. But it'll be clearly reflective of
great.
your action.
All right, so I'll move that, move that staff be asked to return with a cleaned up modification to the ordinance here
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
in
I
keeping with our
believe we need to
discussion.
take a vote
got it.
on what you just seconded. We got to take a vote on that.
Oh, we didn't do that.
No.
I withdraw
And
my
then-
multitasking thinking there.
So let's do roll call.
Member Friend.
Aye.
Member Wolf.
Aye.
Member Keeney.
Aye.
Chair Pro Tem Zaragoza.
Aye.
So now I will move that we ask staff to revise the proposed ordinance with the proposed changes and in keeping with our discussion tonight.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 And for clarification too, when staff brings back that revised draft, that does allow for additional public comment.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Correct.
But it's not a new item anyway, but
Absolutely.
there is the ability for public
Absolutely.
comment one last time on that item before you take your final action.
And Mr. Chairman, I think the commission should congratulate itself on actually taking significant movement on an issue that's been before this commission for at least 7 years. I mean, I think we really just kind of stepped up and dealt with it.
Good. Okay. So now we are moving to, so we had changed the, so that would be item 7. And that would be item 7.1. That would be the minutes of the regular meeting of September 5th. And that was with the members List, Friend, and Keen present for that particular meeting.
This brings up an interesting point. Since Commissioner List is gone, can we still take action on this, even though
I think
we could
you
talk.
can. Two of the members are here.
Okay, that's a quorum.
Yep.
All right.
If the other two were to not participate or just vote present, then we'd still have an action taken on those minutes. And
move
they are
adoption.
relevant because the ADU recommendation is before the council at this time, so.
I'd move adoption.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, that moves to 0. And we will now move to item 7.3, review and potential amendments of Planning Commission bylaws. And I'm going to ask my commissioners if we can go ahead and table this 7.3 long, unless we think we have power to do
All
this.
5 members, too.
And yeah, we were missing a member, so
It's
I'd like to move
automatically,
this to the
yeah.
next meeting.
My understanding is Member Friend will not be present at the next meeting. So we will schedule it at some time.
In the
Well,
future.
is that 2 week? Is that 2 weeks from tonight?
It's 3 weeks. We have 5 Tuesdays in this month.
Well,
What date
you
is
know, it's
November 7th.
surgery's tomorrow. I might be able to limp on in here. So don't go ahead. Give it a shot. Give it a go.
So I'll just make a motion that we table item 7.3 until our next commission meeting.
Second.
We have a second from Member Keen. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, moving on to item 8, matters from commissioner and staff, and we'll start with commissioners. Any items to share?
Only that properly medicated, all things are possible.
Absolutely. Staff, any announcements or?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I do have an item to share, and I will read this item. It's from the Tuesday, October 17th, 2017, out of the Daily Appellate Report, and the title is "Neighborhood Group Unsuccessful in Challenging the Relocation of Courthouse Facilities from Historic Downtown to New Location on Outskirts of City." And this is the Placerville Historic Preservation League versus Judicial Council of California, County of El Dorado, California Courts of Appeal, from October 16th of 2017. And basically the Judicial Council of California certified an environmental impact report in connection with the project, which is to relocate the courthouse operations in the city of Placerville. The plan involved relocating trial court operations from a historic building in downtown Placerville to a single new building located in the city's outskirts, still within the city's limits. Placerville Historic Preservation League opposed the relocation due to concerns over economic impact that the withdrawal of the judicial activities would have on downtown Placerville. It filed a petition for writ of mandate seeking to vacate the certification of the EIR, arguing that the Judicial Council erred in concluding that the urban decay was not a reasonably foreseeable consequence of the project. And the trial court rejected the PHPL's argument and denied the petition. So then that decision was appealed to the appellate court, and the appellate court affirmed. Although the California Environmental Quality Act usually does not require an EIR to address economic and social effects of a proposed project, physical deterioration sufficient to cause business closures and eventual physical deterioration of a neighborhood must be addressed in the EIR. Here, the city possessed economic vitality to tolerate business closures without suffering from urban decay, and there was no evidence to suggest that the downtown courthouse's economic contribution was critical to the health of that area. Additionally, any changes that would occur would likely be short-term because the project contemplated a new use for the courthouse. As such, because of substantial evidence supported the EIR's conclusion that urban decay was not a reasonably foreseeable consequence of the project, this court affirmed. So now where are we? It's my understanding that the monies are currently not available, but we're just awaiting then for the state of California to reappropriate the money, hopefully at some time in the near future, to continue forward with the new courthouse.
Thank you for that update.
Yes.
Yeah, just to alert the commission about the November 7th, there will be 2 meetings on that night, just as a reminder. The first meeting will be a joint meeting with you, as well as the Park and Rec Commission, to discuss the Nexus study regarding the park development fees. So that will be taking place within that first hour, and then there'll be a short break, and then approximately 7 p.m. we will have a public hearing item on at 7 o'clock. So packets for both those and the agendas for both those meetings will, because we have 5 Tuesdays in this month, those would be made available 1 week from tonight.
Mr. Chairman and staff, I do believe I am going to, it's not due to the procedure tomorrow. It's
Okay.
because I am actually physically out of town.
Yeah, I thought so.
That's right. Thank you. Thought we had, yep, that's right.
Okay. Okay, any other announcements? All right, thank you, Pierre. Thank you, Andrew. All right, we stand adjourned this evening. Thank you.